Alright, so last time we had learned together how to cast on, and I have 10 stitches casted on my knitting needle. Remember, it is a bamboo knitting needle. On the right side I had my end yarn hanging up, and that is how I casted on stitches. Alright, so I will stop once I have about 20 stitches on my knitting needle for my swatch, but you can make as many as you want. We're just learning here. We're not creating anything. We are just practicing. This is for beginners and rookies at knitting. Or if you just want to learn a new casting technique and a refresher on the knit stitch, which is what we're going to do today. So knitting is basically creating interlocking little loops, kind of knots, and creating fabric from textile, from really little pieces of yarn. The base stitch is the knit stitch, and this is what we are going to learn to create today. Alright, so you casted your stitches on your knitting needle. The knitting needle where you have your stitches is called your main needle, and that is always going to be the knitting needle where when you begin your row, most of your stitches will be on your main needle. The second needle is the empty needle. We are calling this needle the working needle. I am going to hold that needle, the empty one, in my dominant hand, which is the right hand for me. For people that are lefties, I will try to find tutorials and link them for you down below. So my main needle will be in my left hand and my working needle in my right hand. Alright, so now pay attention to the structure of our loops, okay? So our loop is made out of a string that goes around the needle. And that string right there that goes around the needle is called a leg. Then you have a front part of the leg, which is here at the front part of your loop, and a back part of your leg right there. So you have the front leg here and the back leg there. All right, are you ready to begin to knit? Take your working needle in your dominant hand. You're going to take the tip of your needle and insert it in the front leg of the first stitch on your main needle. Let's zoom in and show you again. The tip in the front leg of your loop, just like so. So you see how your working needle is going in the same direction as your main needle, and that is called knitting direction. So you're going to come right behind the front leg here, in between those two first stitches, and going through the loop in the same direction as your main needle, pinching your needle and creating an X with your thumb and your index, taking your main yarn, the one attached to your ball, with your dominant hand and yarning over the working needle. So let me show it to you again. You grab your working yarn with your dominant hand, you wrap it around the needle, just like so. So you wrap it around your working needle right there in between that X, in the middle part of the X, in between those two needles. Now for the next step, I will use my index finger from my left hand to push that working needle down and use friction to help transfer the stitch from the main needle to the working needle. We want to transfer that stitch from one to the next. So I'm gently pushing with my index down, and with my working needle up, I pick that stitch, and then I take the stitch and transfer it from the left side to the right side, from the main needle to the working needle. The goal is to transfer all the stitches that are on the main needle to the working needle. All right. So right now is the most awkward position because you have half a stitch on one needle and half a stitch on the other. Use your finger to slide the stitch you were working on to your working needle. Here you go, that was your first knit stitch. pull a little bit on your working yarn to tighten your first stitch. Not too much, because you don't want it too tight, but you don't want it too loose so it slides off your working needle. Good job, guys! First knit stitch done. We are going to repeat for the second one. But again, insert your working needle into the first stitch onto your main needle in the front leg. Make sure that your working needle is underneath the main needle. Take your working yarn and wrap it around your working needle so it is in the middle of your X. Push with the index finger to help your working needle grab that little loop, and then help with your index finger to chase away the stitch from the main needle to the working needle. And then you are going to tighten a little bit by pulling your working yarn. So now you have 2 knit stitches on your working needle and the rest is on your main needle, and you're going to continue. You have 2 knit stitch done. Let's do a third one. Again, take your working needle, go to the front leg of the first stitch on your main needle. Underneath, you have your working needle underneath your main needle, creating an X. Wrap your working yarn around your working needle, nest it in the middle, right there, in the middle of the X. Use your finger to help picking up that stitch with your working yarn, and now chase that stitch from the main needle to the working needle, and you have 3 knitting stitches on your working needle. That is all there is to knitting, guys. Let's do it again. So that is what I would like you to do. Practice your knitting stitches until you are pretty comfortable with it. And once you are comfortable with it, I will meet you next time to explain to you how to do the purl stitch. And once you know how to do the knit stitch and the purl stitch, we can create the stockinette stitch, which is 1 row of knit stitch and 1 row of purl stitch. But I'm getting excited there. Let's just practice on our knit stitch for the next few days, and I will meet you once you are a pro with the knit stitch. I am so excited about our new journey in knitting, guys. Here we go. After about 10 stitches, this is what your work will look like. That's the front part of your work, and that's the back part of your work. Isn't it pretty? So pretty. All right, I am finishing my row in here, making my last little knit stitches. Two last stitches and the last one. See, all the stitches were transferred from my main knitting to the working knitting, and now the working knitting needle became the main one. And what you're going to do for the second row, take this yarn full of stitches in your left hand, that's becoming your main knitting needle, and with your working needle you're just going to begin exactly the same way we had done, knitting and transferring the stitches from your main stitch to your working stitch, exactly repeating all the steps from the beginning of this tutorial. Try to make sure your stitches are not too tight. They can slide up and down your knitting needle comfortably. And this is what your second row of knitting will look like. And this is what your work should look like after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows of knit stitches back and forth, back and forth. Isn't it pretty? So that is the knitting stitch for you guys. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, and I am looking forward to move on to the next stitch with you. In the meantime, practice, and I will see you next time. Happy knitting. Bye.